Hello and welcome to the Fragrance Report, a podcast where we discuss the intersection of art, culture, and perfumery. I'm your host, Anya, and today's episode is going to be quite a fascinating one. We're going to dive into the lives of two extraordinary women who used fragrances for very different purposes. One was an alchemist, and she used fragrance as a tool to connect with the divine. The second was a woman who used fragrance as a tool for liberation and vengeance. These two women are called Taputi. She was the first recorded perfumer and alchemist in the ancient city of Babylon. And the other, Julia Tofana, was the notorious poisoner of 17th century Rome. I'm excited to get into this topic, but before we get started, if this is your first time listening to this podcast, I launch a new episode of this podcast every Wednesday on Spotify and YouTube. If you're watching this on YouTube, this is also available on Spotify for you to listen to. And if you're listening to this episode on Spotify, you can also watch the video version on YouTube. I'm really excited about this series because it's a great opportunity for me to talk to you guys about fragrance history in a very in-depth and nuanced way. So if you're interested in listening more of the podcast, definitely do consider following the podcast on Spotify and subscribing on YouTube. Of course, I should start every podcast off with a brief segment on what I've been loving and wearing over the last week. And this time I'm really inspired by the shifts in seasons, and I'm kind of revisiting some old and new favorites that I absolutely have been obsessed with. The first is very fitting for the springtime. This is a Grove by the Sea by Arquiste. This is a stunning, beautiful aromatic fragrance that has a buttery undertone to it that I just love. This is a really comforting olive tree-like fragrance, and to my nose, it kind of smells like olive oil, especially in the dry down. I've been loving the way this smells, and I've also been combining it with another firm favorite, Onsen Minerale by Cult of Kaori. This is a delicious fragrance, especially if you love the idea of a hot steam fragrance. This contains yuzu aldehyde as well, which adds to that hot steam accord. And there are also some aromatics in here and a woody undertone as well as lychee. So both these fragrances are delicious on their own, but then paired together, it's just been absolutely amazing. Chef's kiss. Onsen Minerale itself is a very beast mode fragrance in my opinion. And Grove by the Sea is more moderate, but combined together, this is such a winning combination. And if you like a Grove by the Sea, you might also really enjoy this fragrance by Orbella. This is called Salted Muse. This is a beautiful, salty, woody fragrance with an aromatic fig in here. This smells absolutely delicious, and the salt adds just the right accent to this fragrance to make it really, truly unique and beautiful. Another fragrance I've really been enjoying is On a Date by Replica. This was actually my fragrance of the day today, and I've really been loving this one for a really long time. It's a beautiful vetiver geranium fragrance, I believe, with some rose. It's a very aromatic rose, and it's just such a delicious, fun, sparkling, beautiful fragrance, especially when it's getting a little bit warmer out. This performs really well, especially outdoors. It has a gorgeous sillage. Alright, so let's get into the history portion of this episode. I am really excited to talk about these two women. The first is Taputi. She lived in Babylon, also known as modern-day Iraq, around 1200 BCE. Her full name was Taputi Belatekalim. If I'm mispronouncing that, I do apologize. But Belatekalim translates to overseer of the palace, which suggests that she had a significant and respected position as a member of the royal court. She was known as the first recorded perfumer and alchemist, and her name does appear on Babylonian tablets, so that's how we know of her existence. Taputi stands out because in this ancient world that was dominated by male scientists and alchemists, she was the first person to be recorded as using distillation techniques which were not really understood at the time, but would later have significant influence into the world of perfumery as we know it today. Let's talk about what life was like in ancient Babylon. Now, around this time, Babylon was ruled by the Kassite dynasty, and this was the center of power and culture in Mesopotamia. Babylon was known for its culture and grandeur, as well as in advancements in medicine and science. And perfume did play an integral role in daily life through its use in religious rituals, medicine, and everyday tasks. So perfume was considered a bridge between humanity and the divine. If we also study other ancient cultures, we see that as a running thread. Perfume was used in a lot of religious rituals. It was known to be very sacred, a very valuable commodity. So it did have a big role in how people worshipped and how people connected with the divine. During this time, women's roles were typically relegated to domestic tasks. However, exceptions were made, specifically in court life, if someone was shown to have significant talent or a lot of knowledge when it came to any specific topic. And in this case, Taputi did have a lot of talent when it came to perfume making, so she was given a lot of opportunities to really expand on this knowledge of perfume making in an official capacity and to have access to these rare and special ingredients. As I mentioned before, Taputi was known for being a trailblazer when it came to pioneering the method of distillation, which is a process of removing aromatic oils from any raw materials. And this was a technique that she pioneered in 1200 BCE, and this was not seen again until a millennium later in Alexandria. And here's a more detailed look at her techniques. There's a tablet that bears Taputi's name, and this tablet gives us a lot of insight and information into the ingredients, solvents, and distillation process that Taputi used. So for ingredients, Taputi used a combination of flowers such as calamus, myrrh, balsam, and essential oils from things like cypress and other plants, and the inclusion of myrrh and balsam indicated access to exotic ingredients, likely imported from Egypt or the Levant, suggesting that these resources were readily available at the Babylonian court, at least for what Taputi was doing. Taputi's process also involved using solvents. Remember, this is before modern perfume making techniques. So instead of alcohol, she was using things like water. She was using beer and wine. And this was known to be a precursor to modern perfume making techniques. And when it came to the actual distillation process, her technique involved steeping, filtering, and repeatedly distilling the ingredients. And this was a complex process that not only captured the essence of the flowers, but also expanded the fragrance's longevity. The tablet specified that she used repeated boiling and then cooling techniques, and this suggested that she was using an early form of alembic, which was a device that was later perfected by Arab alchemists. And I'll try to include a picture on the screen so you can see what that looked like. Taputi's perfumes were likely used as a way to appease the gods in ceremonies that required purification or anointment. And scent was also seen as a way to communicate with the divine. The idea of burning incense was sacred because as the steam went up in the air, this was seen as the congregation's prayers going up and communicating with the gods themselves. So in Mesopotamian culture, the line between perfume making and medicine was pretty blurred. Certain ingredients that Taputi used, like cypress and myrrh, were known to have antimicrobial properties, and her techniques suggest a deep understanding with alchemical transformation and aromatherapy. Taputi's techniques are considered to be one of the earlier examples of practical alchemy, the idea of focusing on the transformation of natural ingredients into something tangible, and her use of distillation, filtration, and solvent extraction laid the groundwork for the later development of alcohol-based perfumes in medieval Islamic and European alchemy. Taputi's innovation when it came to alchemy and perfume would also bolster Babylon's position in the trade network of the ancient world, and this would also have tremendous social and spiritual impact, not only for herself individually, but also other Babylonians in her time as well. Unfortunately, we only have limited knowledge of Taputi's life and who she could have been. We don't even have any information about her death or her later life. We do know that she was a scientist, a priestess of scent, and a pioneer of alchemical methods that we still reference and use in some ways today. Let's fast forward in time to 17th century Sicily. We're going to talk about another alchemist. This time, this woman used her skills to weaponize perfume. I am of course referring to Giulia Tofana. She was born around 1620 in Palermo, Sicily, and during this time, Italy was fragmented. It was not the unified country that we know it as today. It was made up of a collection of city-states that were often embroiled in power struggles and intrigue. So life looked very different back then compared to what it is now. And she was suspected to be the daughter of Tofania d'Amato. We don't know this for certain, but Tofania d'Amato, I cannot speak Italian, she was actually executed in 1633 for poisoning her husband. If they were indeed mother-daughter, then we do have an understanding on how Julia's later career would come into fruition. By the mid-17th century, Julia had moved to Rome, and this is where she would establish herself as one of history's most prolific poisoners. Her clientele consisted primarily of women trapped in loveless or abusive marriages, women whose society at the time offered no legal recourse for getting out of these relationships. So let's take a step back and talk about what life was like for women in Italy in the 17th century. Now, this was a patriarchal society, and women were largely seen as property, first to their fathers and then to their husbands, and marriages were often designed to be tools for political or financial gain. Women had little to no say in who they were supposed to be married off to, and the church's strict opposition to divorce left a lot of these women in potentially abusive situations where they had no legal recourse or no legal opportunity to get out of these situations. A woman could legally be beaten by her husband, and seeking separation risked social ostracism and financial ruin. In this patriarchal society, Tofana's services offered a forbidden kind of freedom or justice. By turning to her, women weren't just seeking a way out of their marriages, they were exerting their power in the only way that seemed accessible to them at the time. It is possible that her mother's execution for the poisoning fueled Julia's knowledge not only in toxicology, but also her desire in exerting power in the only way that was really available to her at the time. She initially posed as a cosmetics seller, and she gained trust of women across all social classes, and her business operated very discreetly. She relied on word of mouth, on referrals through word of mouth, and these were spread by women who were so desperate that the only way out that they saw was through poisoning. Julia was known for creating aqua tofana, and this was known as the deadly perfume. This was supposed to be her masterpiece. It was a poison that was clear, tasteless, and often stored in small vials labeled as cosmetics or holy water. Some variations were marked with the image of Saint Nicholas of Bari, a subtle psychological trick that would make this item seem harmless, maybe even pious. And the exact formula is a well-guarded secret, but historical accounts suggest that this formula contained arsenic, which was the main toxic agent causing symptoms that mimicked cholera or other natural diseases. Another poisonous ingredient was lead. This enhanced the power of the poison's effectiveness. And the final key ingredient was belladonna, also known as deadly nightshade. This had a faint floral scent, and it caused dilated pupils, which also helped pass this item off as a cosmetic. And dilated pupils by this point actually were considered to be really attractive. So there were some women, in fact, who put belladonna in their eyes to cause that pupil dilation. And this was also something that could pass this item off as a cosmetic product, which is what they're trying to do. Julia encouraged her clients to administer aqua tofana in small doses over the course of a few days. This delayed action helped prevent suspicion, since the cause of death was often ruled to be the result of a natural illness. Some batches of aqua tofana were rumored to be lightly scented with rosewater or lavender, and this again helped allude to the fact that this was a quote-unquote harmless cosmetic. And these use of the florals were a calculated choice, since these florals were very common in perfumery or medicinal concoctions, and this was their way of making the poison seem less suspicious. And Julia also offered a line of scented face creams, and oils, and these were items that women could leave openly on their vanities, and this also helped divert suspicion. The bottles of Aqua Tofana were often very small and elegant. This helped keep them very discreet, and it made it very easy for women just to have them on their dressing tables. And it was said that a lot of her clients took confession at church with little vials of Aqua Tofana hidden in their sleeves, which was an ironic twist given that the poison was often labeled as Mana of Saint Nicholas. Julia did not operate alone. She built a large network of women, including her daughter Girolama Spada, but these women spanned anywhere from Rome to Naples, and these women included apothecaries, widows, and midwives who were already familiar with herbal medicines and poisons, who helped spread her services across Italy. Midwives and healers were often the only medical professionals available to women at the time, making them ideal candidates for distributors of Julia's product throughout Italy. And this network was so successful that she was able to maintain it for 2 decades. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, depends on how you look at it, Julia's downfall came in the 1650s when a young bride, having second thoughts, confessed to a priest that she had laced her husband's soup with Aqua Tofana. The priest alerted authorities, and under torture, this young bride revealed Julia's name. Tofana sought refuge in a church in Rome, and arrest on church property was considered sacrilege, so she was hoping that no one would be able to get to her if she was still in the church. However, a rumor spread that she was poisoning the water supply, and an angry mob stormed the church and dragged her out. She was interrogated and tortured for days, and under duress, she confessed to poisoning over 600 men, although some historians suggest the number may have been even greater. And in 1659, she was executed in Rome along with several accomplices. Many of her clients were also tried and either executed or imprisoned, exposing a vast network of poisonings that had infiltrated bourgeois households and noble households alike. Even though she was executed, Julia Tofana's legacy lives on. She has inspired other stories, novels, and even operas, especially some modern day perfumes as well. I don't know about you, but Hypnotic Poison, and Pure Poison by Dior all seem to be inspired by her legacy. But thank you for joining me on this episode of the Fragrance Report. I hope you found this episode as intriguing as I did. It was definitely interesting delving into the story of these two extraordinary women, Tofana and Taputi, who both lived at different points in history, but both had a really interesting story to tell regarding perfumery and how they navigated the world in their time. Thank you very much for listening to this episode. I hope you found it interesting, and I will see you next time. Bye. This episode's music was brought to you by Kevin McLeod over at Incompetech. This is Beauty Flow by Kevin McLeod at Incompetech.com and is licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 4.0 license.